going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for your Overwatch. Today we're going to be breaking down a scrim between Team South Korea for the World Cup against the reigning South Korean Contenders champions, Runaway, and particularly noticing some of the interesting team compositions that they've been toying with. Of course, Runaway did actually take away this series, winning it 3-2, but it's a scrim. The goal is to toy around and test yourself, and one of the things that it seemed South Korea was definitely trying to get to grips with is playing against Runaway's GOATS comp, which is something that they rode to success throughout Contenders. People always ask, what is GOATS comp? So please, so I don't have to say it every single video, help us out in the comment section if you see it in the future. GOATS comp is named GOATS because a tier 2 team named GOATS became famous for running it all the time and basically one-tricking it. So the team GOATS ran this comp so much that the comp itself became named after them. The team has since disbanded, but their legend lives on through the comp getting run by tons of pro teams nowadays. It is what I would call a quad tank variant, depending how you count Brigida, and it's what we see Runaway using on screen right now. 3 tanks, 3 supports. Brigida's kind of a tank anyway. It's a close range brawling composition that really wins out on a lot of objectives because it just puts so much meat and brawl on an objective that it's really hard to counter. But interestingly enough, something that South Korea was playing with here is Doomfist Junkrat, set up with the initiations of their Wrecking Ball. First, I'll describe the general principles of what this comp is aiming to do, its strengths and weaknesses, some criticisms I have of it, and then we'll get into some play-by-play of how it works and how you're going to end up succeeding with it. The first thing that I want to note is debunk a big misconception that a lot of people have about how to counter multi-tank comps. Often, the community's perception is a character like Reaper counters it. The problem is that only works if they play it badly, because Reaper really needs to get his value off rather quickly in the fight, or else he's constantly running away. Against the big GOATS comp, they just have so much disable at that close range brawl fight that Reaper can either get ignored or have most of his damage nullified anyway and spend too much time wraithing away, and that's not what you need out of your damage characters. Instead, what you need is big bursts of damage to either have the goal of winning in the mid fight or in the ult fight. For example, Junkrat combining his nades and mines can do enough splash damage to really equalize and outweigh the Moira healing, but realistically, one of the better winning conditions of playing Junkrat is charging up for Riptire, because it's enough of a big burst of damage in order to get picks against this comp, and you can charge it really fast, and because the enemy doesn't really have range, it can't shoot the Riptire before it closes the distance to get into its optimal range. So the theory is, anyway, what your goal is to do with your tank characters is to have them stall on the objective and just try to separate the tanks, boop them around, hopefully maybe even look for some critical damage on a healer if you can, but mostly your job is to stall the objective and wait for your damage to be able to find its mark and hopefully build up for an ultimate. The Doomfist in this comp is an interesting wrinkle because, as I said before, Reaper won't get as much value as actually the Doomfist can, because Doomfist has the mobility to be able to get around the tanking capabilities, such as the Rhine Shield, which Reaper often would just have to end up shooting into, which is the most inefficient way to play. You really want to get flanking angles to try to hit meat, not tanking abilities, not bubbles, not shields. You need to be damaging their health bars, and Doomfist does a combination of things in this comp. Both does he have the capability to do enough burst damage if he lands all of his abilities in order to get a kill in the mid-fight, but also, unlike Reaper, who only does damage, he can knock around the tanks in order to get them away from his tanks, messing up the ability of the GOATS comps to focus fire, while also being a damage threat in his own right. Now, there's a few more aspects of how this comp is working, and to some degree, how it's not working, at least in this scrim. One, I think Hammond is an absolutely crucial component to this, although I think a character like Winston, especially with the live version of Ana, which they're not playing with, by the way, they're on the previous patch, can do a lot of cleave damage and get like essentially an extra life, absorbing their cooldowns and then coming back stronger with nano boost nowadays. The problem is Winston's bubble doesn't really do much against the majority of the GOATS comp. It's better for denying sightlines and blocking some cooldowns, most of which ignore his bubble, unfortunately. So Hammond as the main main tank against Goats is actually probably one of the best calls because he can go in, has the most burst damage out of any tank, and although adaptive shield typically, when you're jumping into the entire enemy team, isn't enough to keep you alive, when the enemy isn't running damage characters that really can punish Hammond, he can afford to take a few swings of Ryan's hammer as well as the other focus fire that's coming through from the tanks and get out of there. Not to mention, his ground aerial denial ultimate with his proximity mines is really good against this comp as well. Perhaps one of the best tank ultimates, in fact, and is going to do devastating damage, especially if you can catch them out when their speed amp is down so they can't speed away before the mines arm. One major weakness that I would like to see Team South Korea fix in their approach with this is playing Mercy here, actually. I understand the Zen, using trance aggressively can win fights, Discord Orb helps focus fire these tanks down, but I think Mercy's kit is actually very inefficient against the Goats comp. I assume in theory their goal is to damage amp their DPS characters so they can get their ultimates faster, like Junkrat's Riptire, for example, as we've already explained. But I think with the Goats comp inability to get to high ground quickly without speed boosting their way all the way around to go upstairs to get there, I think it's a huge mistake to not look to play Ana, who can take up some severe ranged power positions, almost similar to where the Junkrat likes to play, and land mid-fight abilities that absolutely devastate this comp. The reason why I think, at least traditionally, a lot of teams don't like running Ana against the multi-tank is that if you're running on a Zen, your backline has to play very perfectly against Goats because it has Lucio's speed boost that will just run you over, and you have to be prepared to not get caught out by the speed amp. And also, there's a whole lot of BS that can get Ana's abilities to get zero value if you're not careful. Zarya bubbles, there's a Rhine shield in the way, defense matrix, even Brigitte's shield can block some of it. It can be hard to get any angles in order to land Sleep Dart or Anti-Nade. However, I think one of the biggest benefits to running the Doomfist here is that he has the mobility to go in and out to disrupt these tanks in order to find ways to make those abilities land. It might be difficult in theory to get a rocket punch to connect at the same time that you're throwing a nade, but you CC the Rhine out of the way or you stun lock the Diva. I think they'd have a much better time running Ana in this position, especially when you look back to this defense of Hanamura, where the entire time the Junkrat's allowed to play this obnoxious position up top. And yes, they do end up setting the Diva up top in order to take care of it, and we have the benefit of Rez playing Mercy, but I think if you have Ana on the high ground opposite of this location, crossfiring down into the tank comp, the Goats comp physically cannot go to point. They would have to go get this Ana out, and the more space you require the Goats comp to take before they get to the point is always a good idea in my opinion. If they commit to the low ground with the Ana up top, I think you just instantly win. There's no way that they're going to always be able to protect from their backsides getting hit with an anti-nade. And also, you probably get a ton more healing value out of Ana in that position, whereas Mercy sort of has to fly in and out of the brawl and trying to escape getting focused, which she kind of can, but even so, I think you're not really getting the big impact out of that support slot as you could if you set up an Ana to counter it instead. And Arc is a great Ana player. He might not have the god tier mechanics of a player like Jonak, but who does? I hope to see them whip out the Ana this weekend in the group stage. Now for our last section, we're going to go play by play looking back at some of these team fights to further explain what we've said thus far. Hanamura A, the Goats comp with speed boost and all the tanking surrounding it, it's really difficult to stop them from getting to the point, and they do attempt to engage them here in the middle of the map, but they're able to just run past it. This is one benefit of running Hammond in this slot, because whereas the Winston places down a bubble and pokes, well, if they just ignore him and go to point, now all of a sudden they're fighting in close range where they want to be. All the while they're taking the point here. We needed to have committed and made it expensive for them to get to the point, but they failed to do so. So in order to compensate for that, Fate goes to the hamster pick and Carpe goes to Doomfist. Now, Runaway has a big ultimate advantage here, but Team South Korea also has enough to be able to have a chance as well. Riptire goes in, takes out the Lucio, not really enough, still ultimates coming out, but luckily Jonak and Arc both get their ultimates, which really thins out this brawl, and Fate gets his, which he drops onto the point. Minefield makes it really hard for the Goats comp to be on point where they want to be anyway, really funnels them into predictable patterns, which is another reason why the Hammond pick here is really strong. Now, it actually feels like South Korea is probably going to full hold here. The problem is, though, playing up against Goats, it just can always go again. Keep jumping on point, keep brawling it out and building their different ultimates, so they're always at threat to be able to overwhelm you if you make a mistake. And as we go into this next fight, Team South Korea looks to be at a massive advantage. Ton of ultimates to work with. Runaway rushes up on top and and some disruption kicks in. They knock off the Reinhardt down to the point so he can be focused. As well, they eat the Graviton, so they're actually looking very safe in order to take this fight. However, they just don't press Q in time. The GOATS comp launches self-destruct, Coalescence, and Rally, pushing their way down onto the point without a main tank at all, by the way. And I don't know if this is greed from South Korea's point of view, where they think they can win this fight without having to ult, but I think up against GOATS, you don't need to be greedy. If they're trading out ultimates, feel free to just pop your Qs, because that's really what's going to end up beating you on a big open map like this. Your comp's designed to be able to counter GOATS as long as you play it right. For some reason, Arc and Jonak are really slow to pop their ultimates. Fate has his ultimate this entire time. I think if they just press Q immediately at this point, as Runaway looks to commit to this, they instantly win. So I don't actually think it's the composition. I think it was a misplay. Now, going on to King's Row, they execute this comp a lot better here. And again, the script is basically the same. Runaway's GOATS comp is allowed to get 2 ticks on the board, but as long as South Korea plays right and just stalls the objective as much as they can and sort of wastes as much time as possible, they'll eventually start to win out over the course of the match. But here's an example where I think this Mercy pick shows how poor it is, especially when you're playing it with Orisa, because I think the strongest thing that Mercy does in this comp is damage amp, actually, not heal. But the problem is if you're popping both Bongo and Mercy amp, the damage amp abilities don't stack, so really you're only getting the 50% from the Bongo, meaning that you're probably going to need to use more chain healing, but the only way you're getting chain healing on your team as Mercy is if your team is all together, but that's how the GOATS comp wants to play. So really, you're using an ultimate to get worse chain healing than Moira does anyway, just with her normal abilities. Libero uses a Riptire to demech the D.Va at the start of this fight and even builds up to a second one, but it isn't really enough to stave off or make an impact in the fight. But that's fine, they only needed a tick anyway, so it was going to be pretty hard to defend that. Even if they win the fight, they might even lose the tick, just based on the brawling presence that the GOATS comp is going to have. But going into Streets phase now, we can really see where Hammond shines. King's Row is a map that Hammond, at the pro level at least, has grown to love. Probably because there's narrow alleyways and walls everywhere, so he always can get a grappling hook wherever he wants and swing into action, and you can very reliably get pile drivers to land. And we look at this split engagement as they attack the GOATS comp from both sides. Doomfist coming in from the back, Hammond coming in from the front. They start to thin out the GOATS comp, and again, this Zenyatta Transcendence comes in the clutch to save them from Grav. All the while, they're stalling out this fight and the point in order to buy time for their Junkrat to end up carrying things. This is actually a bit hilarious to watch. They start the fight with the Riptire, and they just keep attacking from both ends. The D.Va can launch a self-destruct in the back while damage is coming from the front. Hammond just swinging his way in, doing a bunch of melee damage, touching the cart, stalling it out, but also causing disruption and getting a lot of splash damage in. These fights are going so well for Team South Korea that Runaway ends up swapping over to Pharah, which is one problem with, of course, running both Junkrat and Doomfist that you can't really get around. No matter how well they play, they're always going to be at a bit of a disadvantage against Pharah, even on King's Row. But I think this is another area where Ana starts to look really good, though it does depend on the map, and it might not end up working here because there's way too high of rooftops in order to justify running Ana. But especially on other maps where she has better sight lines, you can definitely shut down a Pharah from really long ranges and, of course, be a threat to whatever tanks they do have, which is always a great place to be in when you're trying to pick a hero. Are they good against also the next thing that they might swap against? That's what kind of creates meta, where you start to play a counter-picking meta game to what's even viable to run, and the last thing you end up on that is strong against most things is typically what people end up playing. Or the other option you could go down is having your own Pharah from the jump. I think that makes a lot more sense with the Mercy. I don't really get the Mercy Junkrat combo because I think a lot of times he does have to end up shooting into shields, whereas Pharah, she jumps over a lot of the tanking that the enemy has in this comp, so the damage amp on her makes a little bit more sense to me. But hey, we'll have to see what they end up running in the World Cup. That's going to be the next high-level Overwatch that we get the chance to spectate. That's going to be it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.